I'm so glad that we have so many participants today. It makes me really, really happy. And on my screen, I'm going to be toggling back and forth because I can see like 25 on each screen and we're up to 48. So I'll be going back and forth. So I know that Nicole and Ashley and Paige, everybody will be paying attention. If I miss your hand, whether it's your real hand or your little icon hand, they will help me. And I want to make sure that I get everybody's input. Um, First I'm going to open it up by asking a few of you to tell me what you thought, your questions, your comments, your complaints, observations. I already heard the first one, and I'm sure that it's one that many of you share with Frida. You're thinking, am I losing it? To use your words, Frida. Am I losing it? Is this story really being told by a tree? And the answer is yes, a fig tree to be specific. And the question is why? And, for some people, that fig tree narrator may have been a little off-putting or a little challenging. But I think for the most part, and I have discussed this book with a number of groups, everybody came to love the fig tree because the fig tree becomes her own character. We find out that the fig tree, this is a female fig tree, even though there are male fig trees as well. So the question is, why do we think the author chose to tell this story about a love affair gone wrong, so to speak, a Turkish man, a Greek Cypriot and a Turkish Cypriot, a Greek man and a Turkish woman whose relationship was not something that the culture could accept. And we'll really get into the dynamics of that. But why do we think the author decides to tell the story not from Costas's point of view and not from Daphne's point of view, but from the fig tree's point of view? And the second part of that is, was it effective for you, or was it in some ways an obstacle that got in your way? So I'm not going to take everybody, all right? I'm going to take the first 5 or 6 people, and then
I saw Eileen, I see you, and I see Marguerite next.
Eileen and Marguerite, I see. Yes, Eileen first.
Okay, so I was going to share before you asked your question that I was on page 109 when I finally said to myself, I don't know, I didn't think I was crazy because I was following what she was doing and saying, but I decided that the author must be crazy. And what bothered me was that I picked this book. When we had a chance to pick the book, I selected this one. So I'm thinking, I can't believe I picked this book. So anyway, I stopped at 109 and I go to the cover to read about the author, who I thought was nuts, okay? But I read about her and she has such amazing credentials with so many awards, and she's such a fabulous author that I got back into the book and said, okay, let the tree talk to me. It's all right. I'm going to change my whole philosophy on the thing. But I think it's great that it was a love story, and I think it's fine that the tree was the one telling the story rather than from either the Greek or the
Turkish.
The two of them. It was fine with me. I was okay with that once I decided that the author wasn't nuts.
Okay, and I will say to you, thank you for voting for this book, because I am delighted to be talking about it, and I will reveal a little secret. Cyprus is the island from which both my parents come. Both parents were born in Cyprus, so a lot of the cultural conflict was very familiar to me, and of course I'll talk about it. But let's go, Marguerite, I think you put your hand up next.
I felt that the fig tree was symbolic of God. I felt that the fig tree was loving, forgiving, understanding, encouraging, nourishing in the sense of reduced figs, if you want to go back to the symbolism.
Yes.
And I thought it was a fascinating book, the way she did it.
Oh, I'm glad. In addition to being sort of having an,
this is not the answer.
I don't know that I would say God, but I would definitely say the tree is this omnipotent, omniscient voice. kind of like God, right? Who can see everything and who knows everything and who knows things that all of the other characters, all of the other players in the story don't know. But the tree sees everything. The
And
tree-
loves.
And yes, the tree hears everything. And the tree is like many of the people who had to flee their homes, is uprooted, taken to a foreign place, and then rerouted with the hopes that it will survive. And that's very much symbolic of what happens not only to Costa and Daphne, but it is also something that has happened to so many migrants in so many different situations in so many different countries. And so the tree is so symbolic in so many different ways. But thank you for that. Absolutely. Okay.
I saw Suki, and did you want to add something? Because I saw your hand was up before. Sue, if you want, did you want to add some? Yeah. go ahead.
Yeah, I thought that the tree, I liked the comment that the tree stood in the place of God, because that was a little bit of what I was thinking. But I also think that it provided a neutral break at crucial times.
Yes.
And it also provided a lot of education about the possibility of plants and animals communicating among themselves.
Yes, yes. Very, very well put and absolutely spot on. The tree, for me, was so effective for all the reasons that we've been talking about. And it helps the author, who I do agree with you, Eileen. I don't think she's nuts. I think she's brilliant. And she's very much an activist. She is trying to bring together so many different themes, everything from the political conflict to a sense of identity that the daughter feels she's missing. She doesn't know where her parents have come from. She doesn't understand why everything is a secret. So there are questions of identity. There's questions of being uprooted, as we said. And she manages, I think, expertly to weave these themes together very seamlessly. So, okay, I see another hand, Jen Stein.
Yep. If you want to unmute, Jen.
Hi, Jen.
Sorry. Hi. I'm sorry. I'm in my car. So I too, when I first started reading this book, I started reading it. I put it down. I said, this is about a tree. It's ridiculous. I live in South Florida, palm trees. It's not very exciting.
Right.
I went to New York and I went to my parents' house where there's humongous trees. I'm everywhere, and the most beautiful trees. And I'm reading the book and I'm like, these trees are talking. They really are talking and they're watching. And I love this book so much. Once I got transported to another spot where the trees, like, I'm looking around me right now, they're very boring here. But in New York, they're so alive. I mean, in most places on the East Coast, they're so alive. And like when the tree got sick, I was so upset. And then when it affected me, and you realize how special everything around us is in the universe, basically.
Yeah. And the love that Costas has for this fig tree, who for him also represents Daphne. It is what has come with them, right? And when he lovingly uproots the tree and covers it and then replants it, I mean, it's such a wonderful sign of love. And again, I'm going to pepper this discussion with some anecdotes because I can't help myself. My grandmother brought over a fig tree from Cyprus when she came to live with us in 1957. And she wasn't supposed to, I have to admit. So she snuck in a little twig of a fig tree that was then planted in my growing up home in Astoria, Queens, and is still there. It is my parental home. My sister still takes care of that place, and the fig tree is doing well because my father and my grandmother would do the same thing year after year. And as a child, I remember my dad would go to the hardware store and buy black tar paper, and he'd wrap it around the tree. And then every spring he'd, open it up and welcome it back. So very much, fig trees are very, very prominent, as you might have guessed, in Cyprus. Fig trees and olive trees are all over the place. Okay, I see Sabrina and then Frida again. Sabrina?
Yeah, if you want to mute, go
Hi
ahead.
there.
Hi.
Okay, well, I am a self-proclaimed tree hugger. Love,
Yay.
always have, always have. And I have to say that when I first started reading it, I said, is he gonna have is this gonna be about a love story between the tree and him? I was like, I thought it was a love story between the two of them. And I'm like, I don't know if I could go down this road or how interested that would keep me. But I said, you know what, I'm gonna give it a chance.
Thank you.
And I'm really glad that I did. Well, I'm really glad that I did, because the way it was written was just the descriptions. I mean, I want to see this in a movie.
Yes.
Because the visuals just seemed, they were so stunningly described that I was pulled in. And also on, it's something that what Jen said. So I was born and raised in New York City. So that's also why I became a tree lover. Like, I really just fell in love with trees and always found my favorite trees. And I do miss that living here in Florida now very much. So the energy of trees, I'm very connected to energy of trees. I see Frida, you're like, you probably feel the same. And how beautiful it was described. And it really connected me to that, how the love that Costas, that he had, the way he cared for this tree, the way he loved this tree, nurtured it. It was the energy of her. And I'm gonna get the chills, because it's so beautiful. It was a great, I thought the book was so well written. And so I loved the tree as the narrator. I thought that was done. It was brilliant.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed that. Yeah.
Okay, Berna?
Let me just go to Frida first. Let's Frida go ahead, because I know you've been.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't say, sorry,
But
Frida.
that's okay. Go ahead.
Can't hear her.
Frida, you have to unmute. Okay.
Okay. I too am from New York, from the South Bronx, and I love trees. We had a house up in the country, and when we used to visit my grandmother, I've always loved trees. I like to be under them. Right now I'm facing you, but I have a tree on my right and I have another tree on my left outside. And I knew after I read the book, I've always believed living things has a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole can tell you, Sabrina, I have a lot of plants in my house. I ran out of space to put them. And I talk to them, and my kids, my grandkids, and my kids used to say that our apartment looked like a jungle when they were growing up. Now my grandkids, they say, Beba, why are you talking to the plants? I'm like, you're supposed to talk to them,
Right.
saying when you water them. I tell the ones in the kitchen in the morning, hello, babies, how are we doing? The ones on this side, I tell them, how's my girls? And then I have one that I just transplanted her, and I call her Madame, because she's in a better pot. And the other ones on this side of my right, every morning I say, hello, sweeties. And then I open the curtains and I say, so let there be light. And I talk to them, but when I was reading the book, I knew that the trees also have feelings like plants.
Yes.
You know, when you can tell, I love trees. My favorite one is the weeping willow. I don't know what it is. I love my weeping willow, but everywhere I see trees, I go into this zone that I'm there by myself with the trees. And I just wanted to
Thank
tell
you.
you guys that.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Berna? Oh, unmute, please.
I was fascinated from the very beginning because I believe there were only 3 trees mentioned in the Bible, and the fig tree is one of them. And a lot of when they always talk about the apple in the Garden of Eden, but I believe it was really a fig tree because they didn't have apples. And so I knew from the very beginning that this fig tree was going to be very, very important. And also, you know, a man plants a fig tree, and that means it's his home. And some people do that symbolically, especially if they live in the southern climate. It's hotter in northern climate. So that fascinated me from the very beginning. The other thing that tore me apart was that well, it's really about the whole book, that we haven't learned the darn thing. And just so sad. It's a brilliant book. I adored the book. And then I've read her before. She wrote a book called The Bastard of Baghdad, which was wonderful. I think that was the name of it. But I think it was interesting, and I love the idea of the tree talking and giving only information. Somebody wrote that in the chat. So I thought it was wonderful.
Great. Okay, all right, I'll take one more, Marguerite, and then I'll take it away, and then I'll go back to you. So Marguerite, you're up. Please unmute. Unmute.
I live in Montgomery, Alabama, so we have lots and lots of trees. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
And one problem that we have with fig trees is that we have to protect them from the birds, because you have to get up in the morning before the birds do in order to get the figs, or otherwise they're gone. So I would like to pursue the symbolism involved in that.
Yes,
and
yes.
relate that to the book. The protection that's inevitable. And we talk about protection in this book between the Greeks and the Turks too.
And, you know, a question of protection is the tree in so many ways is the protector until, of course, it too falls victim, because everything happens at the happy fig, at the place that Yusef and Yorgos have. The tavern there, the Happy Fig, and of course their little resident parrot Chico. They are observers of the various love stories, including the love story between Yorgos and Yusef, as well as Kostas and Daphne. But unfortunately, as we said earlier, and someone also just mentioned, we haven't learned very much, have we? Where, you know, not every relationship is accepted as a valid relationship, or again, as an accepted relationship. Let me just chime in a few minutes. Let me give you some more background, and then we'll take it back. Let me tell you a little bit about the author for those of you who are new to her, and I will confess this is the first book I've read of hers. She has written 19 other books. She has been translated into 65 languages, and until 15 years ago, she was writing in her native language, which is Turkish. She was born in France in 1971 to Turkish parents, but she was raised in Turkey, and she was raised by a single mom who was a diplomat. She earned a PhD in political science, and she's a wonderful researcher who says in order for her to present on an authentic perspective, it was necessary for her to step back. And she said that she really didn't want to take sides. And that's why she decided on the fig tree as the most neutral narrator, the neutral observer, the spokesperson for Cyprus. And a little bit more about the fig tree, and then I'll go back to her in a moment. She chose the fig tree for the following reasons. Some of them we've already covered. But she said it was interesting to her that trees, particularly the fig trees, have longer lives than humans. And they have witnessed much more than any one of us can during our more limited lifetime if we compare ourselves to the plants. She also wanted to explore the theme of what it means to be uprooted and rerooted. You know, how difficult is that? And talking about protection, because this is your question, Marguerite, if you uproot someone or something, or even as you said, Frida, I think it was Frida, right? That you replanted, right? You're transplanting. So when I just recently transplanted something too. So, but when you transplant something, what obligation do you have? Don't you have the obligation to make sure you protect that very vulnerable and fragile tree or plant or living thing that is in shock, right? You've just taken it out, even though it may have been in a lovely pot, you put it in a better pot, a bigger pot, or a better place. You think it's a better place, but you still have that responsibility. So, there's this question of protection. Who is going to protect those who have been transplanted, especially if they have not moved from one place to the other by choice, especially if they've had to be uprooted, not because of their own decision or their own agency. As I said, she wants this tree to be a female tree. And she said that it was an organic metaphor. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes authors use symbols. They pull symbols out of a hat just because they want to have some kind of symbolic or double meaning. And those symbols don't always work. But a fig tree is a fig tree is a fig tree. Fig trees are real in Cyprus. Fig trees can be transplanted. Fig trees do have longer lifespans than humans. So everything that she says about the fig tree, except that the fact that it talks to us, is very much true. But as so many of you have pointed out, I do believe that trees communicate with other trees. They may not have the same kind of conversation that we're having here on Zoom, but they are having their own conversation as to what species need to be protected, and what do the leaves do. So there are different built-in mechanisms that trees have that send out signals to other living organisms. And so she gets into that a little bit. And so now back to her for a minute. This is what she believes as a writer. She says that she believes that fiction is a platform for ideas. It is a platform for asking questions, especially if those questions are difficult ones. And not that she has answers, but she feels that this book, she hopes anyway, that this book will help us ask the difficult questions and maybe think about them, if not answer them. And those of you who've been with me before know that I always have my own, what I call essential questions. What are those important questions that the novel raised for me after I closed the book, after I put the book down? And perhaps these are the questions that Elif Shafak wanted me to think about, but maybe not. These are my questions. Number one, what do we do with our inherited anger or our inherited hatred? And what do I mean by that? Perhaps as a child, we received certain notions that we heard from people who we respected, our parents, our grandparents, our religious leaders, our political leaders, our teachers, someone who said that we are us and they are them, and never the twain shall meet. And so it's an inherited prejudice, an inherited anger or hatred that you don't quite understand. And sometimes it doesn't even have to do with culture or politics or religion. It's just a family thing. And again, another anecdote. I don't know how your families operate, but there were a group of cousins that we weren't supposed to like. And I don't really know why we weren't supposed to like them, but growing up, I knew that we did not really mix with them. They didn't come to the family gatherings or the family reunions. Until we grew up into our adult life, myself, my sister, and the cousins that I'm speaking about, and we all found ourselves at a table at a wedding, sitting together at some other cousin's invitation. And at the end of the night, well, at the beginning, we were all like, oh my goodness, do we really want to sit together? And by the end of the night, we were having such a wonderful time. And the question we asked ourselves, and this anecdote is really connected to the book, why don't we like each other? Could somebody tell us why we don't like each other? And so the question that's rooted in this novel, why is it that the Greek citizens and the Turkish citizens don't like each other? And of course, that perspective depends on who you ask. Because again, if you asked my grandmother, she had a different answer. If you asked my mother, she had a different answer. If you asked my father, he had a different answer. If you ask my cousins who still live there today, they say, oh yeah, well, no, it's not like that anymore. And so the answer depends on, of course, the time and the place. But what do you do? How easy or how difficult is it for somebody to shed, whether it's a prejudice or an inherited notion that doesn't fit you comfortably, right? Because, and I bring this connection to Miriam, okay, to go back to the book, because Miriam chooses not to attend her sister's funeral in England. And why does she choose that? Not because she doesn't want to be there, but because she has promised her parents that she will not go against their wishes, and their wishes are to cut all ties with Daphne. So that's where my question comes from. At what point do you say, you don't want me to do that, but you know what? I don't really like that rule. It doesn't fit me comfortably. I have to go against that. Some people can and some people can't. But for her, she is unable to visit her niece until her parents are gone. And that liberates her. All right. So, what do we do with our inherited anger or hatred? Sometimes we hold on to it until it's more comfortable for us to move away from it. Sometimes we can't let go of it, and that impacts and informs the decisions that we make. And some of those decisions are really hard. So that was one question. The second question has to do with Costa and Daphne's request of Costa not to tell their daughter, Ada, or Ada, I think is the Turkish pronunciation, what the history was. She says, no, don't tell her. She doesn't need to know. Okay, what happened. It's between you and me, and she's living in another world and in another place, and let's not burden her. We understand why the mother does that, right? Let's not burden her with our troubled, fraught history. Let her have a new path, a new life in a new land. And that seems all well and good until she has to write about her family history. And she realizes, gee, I don't really know what my family history is. So the question, right, I'm circling around to this question is it best to share or to hide one's history from the next generation, especially if that history is painful? Now, we could be talking about genocide. We can be talking about a Holocaust. We could be talking about skeletons in the family closet. Oh, you don't want to know about so-and-so. We could be talking about anything that is part of the family history that someone decides it's better not to tell them. And so that's a question for us to consider, right? And we will in a minute. And then my last question, my essential question is there a difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom? Okay. Can you give someone information? How does that impact one's knowledge? And how does that impact the wisdom we glean from that? So I'll take a pause, turn it back to you, answer any of the questions or none, and then I'll take it back in a few minutes if anybody would like to comment. Let me see if I see any hands.
Let's see. I don't see any. Oh, Eileen, go ahead. Hold on.
I would say that the question where you ask if you should tell them about the family history, I think it's important to share the family history, good or bad. I think that everyone in the family should know of what happened in the past. I'm reading another book now, and it's the same thing where the past is hidden from them. And the book before that, the past was hidden from them. But in each case, I didn't agree with it. I think that the past should be shared, and you should know what your past was or what your family's past was.
And so how do you think it impacts Ada, right? Or Ada? Remember at the beginning when she doesn't know how to answer this question, and she has this moment that to some people thought was a little bit peculiar, but she screams, right? And it evokes, for those of you who are familiar with the very famous, the very iconic painting of 1893, Edward Munch's The Scream. And even if you don't know it by name, I'm sure you would know. We even have an emoji for it. You know, it's sort of like this ghost-like figure with the open mouth and the eye, you know, like, and that is symbolic, right, of some kind of angst, an anxiety perhaps of the human condition in general. But in Ada's case, she's trying, but she has no voice because she has no past. And so it's an interesting literary allusion that the author uses, again, to highlight one of the many themes that she's trying to present to us.
Yeah, I see Mariana, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is absolutely necessary to know your past. You have to know what was happened so you can interact with people. I think that past gives you information. As far as the wisdom to deal with it, that's going to be on you. It depends who you are.
That's beautiful connection. Thank you. You know, you can have the information, but what you do with it really determines whether or not you act wisely or not, right? Whether you have the wisdom to maybe process it or to analyze it. And again, if it means that, okay, well, that was then, but this is now, and therefore those rules don't apply. I don't have to follow those rules if they don't fit me. And what do I do to change them? So thank you for that. Is there another hand? Yes, Marguerite?
I'm just gonna unmute.
You're good, Marguerite.
Okay, all right. I hate to disagree, but there was something in my family about some particular person, and I did not know about it until about 15 years ago. And I'm very thankful that I didn't know, because I think growing up, I would have felt a little bit inferior, or a little bit ashamed of something. And I'm just glad I only knew about the good things and could grow up in a way that I was sheltered from that particular person. And I know that sounds a little strange, but anyway, I kind of.
No, it doesn't. And you know why these essential questions are so essential for me is that there's no right answer.
Right.
Because, and this is what makes the book so complicated and so rich. We understand why Daphne doesn't want to share that information, right? We have to talk about Daphne as a character, right? And she's an anthropologist. We see that she is depressed. We know that she has some alcohol issues. We know that she's lost a child. We know she makes decisions that are not the ones that she would have made happily had she the choice. And what is it that she does? She helps people who have lost loved ones come to terms with their loss. She wants to offer some kind of dignity, some kind of closure. And it is unfortunately a kind of closure that their daughter does not have. And though she thinks by not telling her, she can close the book, to you continue with the metaphor, right? She can close that door behind her and move on into a new life. But sometimes it all depends on what that history is. Maybe, you know, a situation with a single family member is not exactly the same as an inherited, I'm going to use the word dislike. You can use the word hatred, but my grandmother was not a fan of the Turks. The end. There was just no talking to her. Okay, now my grandmother was born in 1899. So born in a different place, born in a different time, and experienced the political situation in Cyprus very differently from the way my mother did, because by that time it was over, she was gone. But my grandmother experienced it very differently. And for those of you, again, the fig tree gives us some information, but real quick, until 1960, Cyprus was a British colony, it was under British rule. And it got its independence in 1960 and had like a few years of rather peaceful conditions until 1974, when two outside countries, and again, Cyprus is its own country, not just an island. It is not part of the Greek Isles. Many people consider it so because of its geographic proximity to Greece and to Turkey. But both countries, because the citizens of Cyprus share a culture and a religion, right? The Turkish and the Greek, both countries, Greece and Turkey, decided this island should be annexed or should belong to them. Well, nobody liked that idea, especially the citizens of Cyprus who said, no, we don't want to be under Greek rule. We don't want to be under Turkish rule. We are our own country. Long story short, terrible uprising. The UN has to go in. And to this day, it is a country divided by what the UN has marked as the green line. And the green line goes right down the middle of the island. If you had a chance to look at what the island of Cyprus looks like, to me, it always kind of looked like the US, the shape of the US. So you just take a line and you split it down the middle. And at that point, 1974, all of the Turkish citizens had to go to the eastern part of the island, no choice. And all of the Greek citizens had to go to the western side of the island, even though people were coexisting rather nicely, rather comfortably. Neighbors, they were fine until the big names came in. In any case, people were like this fig tree, no choice of their own, asked to leave. And they switched sides in droves. And to this day, although my cousins do tell me that things have advanced slowly, but they're moving in the right direction. And there is, in fact, a committee at present, the Committee on Missing Persons, who, like Daphne, the goal is to dig for human remains that were unfortunately left during this terrible uprising, to return them to family members, and to offer a dignified burial and some closure to the families. So it is a torn country, and so we understand where Ada is coming from. Okay, back to you for some questions or comments. With still a lot more to say.
Anyone have?
Anybody?
And or want to talk? Want to add anything?
Berna?
Hold on. I'm gonna unmute. Go ahead. Berna, we can't hear you. You're unmuted. I just the volume.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just like India and Pakistan,
Yes,
somebody came in, drew a line after the British left,
right.
and also the city of Smyrna. Have you ever read about that?
Yes, yes.
And that is a fascinating book about what happened to people living together peacefully until somebody decided that they shouldn't.
Exactly, exactly. And we have many countries in the world, North and South Korea. We have Ireland, and again, the politics are a little different, but here is a shared land that is divided in ways that the author beautifully describes. Some of you already mentioned what a lovely writer she is, but this is what she says about maps. especially maps that are arbitrary, right? Somebody comes in and says, okay, we're going to divide this country in half. A map is a two-dimensional representation with arbitrary symbols and incisive lines that decide who is to be our enemy and who is to be our friend, who deserves our love and who deserves our hatred, and who our sheer indifference. Cartography is another name for stories told by winners. For stories told by those who have lost, there isn't one. And how true is that, right? If someone just says, you know, this is no longer your land, go. So if you're the winner, you can tell that story any way you like. And if you're the loser, no one's going to listen to your story because your story probably won't be told. And so, again, some of the things that the author talks about, if you have time, she's a lovely speaker. If you have time and you just Google her, she's given a number of interviews and she's a great activist. And this is what she wanted to achieve with this novel. She said her goal, not only this novel, but all of her novels, she said her goal is always to connect across borders. And of course, we're talking now about these lines, right? These arbitrary lines. She believes that where there is policy, there is power. And therefore, she's very active in a number of different, active with a number of issues, both environmental and feminist, hoping to write policy or to help write policy. As I said earlier, she's interested in asking questions in a safe space, creating that safe space where we can ask the questions. And lucky for us, we have this space where we can explore some of her ideas. Another one of her goals, and I think she fulfills it, is to give voice to the voiceless. And, you know, making Ada not have a voice, right? That is also symbolic. She loses her voice in the beginning, but then she finds it, right? And then she is able to return and to have the support of classmates. She also says that stories help us empathize. And I have this wonderful quote that I'd like to share with you. It says, and I agree with her completely, fiction gives us empathy. It puts us inside the minds of other people. It gives us the gifts of seeing the world through their eyes. Fiction is a lie that tells us true things over and over. And this was by Neil Gaiman. And I do see a hand up, Bernice.
Just unmute. Go ahead.
Hi, Bernice.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
At the beginning of the book, Anna it's the young girl, Ada. She's Ada.
Yes.
She's in school and school is going to be let out and it's Christmas vacation. And she starts screaming at the top of her lungs. Why is she screaming?
Okay, so that's one of the things that I was trying to explain. This was my interpretation, okay? So she's given an assignment, right? And if you remember, she's given an assignment to write during the holiday about her family.
Correct. And she doesn't know anything about the family.
Correct. And so she has this moment. Whether you buy into it or not, it becomes I think, a very effective tool by the writer. She kind of has a little breakdown, if you will. She stands up and she just lets out this scream. And as I was saying, she has a voice, but she doesn't have a voice, right? The scream is there, but she's not saying anything intelligible because it seems she has nothing to say. She doesn't have that information. And as I don't know if you were on when we talked about the connection to the painting by Edward Munch. You might recognize this iconic image it looks very ghost-like, long and ghost-like, and there's this mouth, you know, and it was like, oh, and as I said, there's even an emoji to suggest that someone is having great anxiety, because that's what that particular painting of 1893 represented. That's what the artist wanted it to represent, that it was the collective anxiety of the human condition. And so it becomes, maybe you want to call it a gimmick or a tool that the author uses to make her point. And I don't know if that answers your question well enough.
I don't think it made a point. The other students ridiculed her. The father was called into school. She didn't know how to go back to school to face the students. I didn't really see the relevancy of that.
But well, in the beginning, we're confused as readers, right? But at the end, she is able, once she starts putting a lot of the pieces together, that voicelessness and that anxiety that we saw at the beginning of the novel is kind of, it goes away. It's a little bit, it's alleviated a little bit. And she has found her voice. And I think it's thanks to Miriam. Here she comes, and Miriam, you know, her aunt Miriam, she's the Turkish aunt who comes in, and she's a very funny character. Now that she's able to kind of, what's the word? She kind of becomes herself. She says in her head that I'm not going to do, at this point, I'm free to connect with my niece and my brother-in-law. I don't have to listen to my parents because they've gone. So she comes to England with her little fancy luggage, her Marilyn Monroe luggage, and she's got all these sayings and all of these superstitions, and she helps her niece understand the culture that her mom and dad met, and the obstacles that they encountered, and why they didn't have such an easy, more traditional relationship that could be openly discussed. I mean, she knows, Ada knows that her mom is drinking a lot. And I think, let me just read for a moment, because I just saw something come in. I haven't been able to read the chat. The scream is a stand-in for voiceless. Yes, I agree 100%. And then she does manage to find her voice by the end of the novel. Again, if it didn't work for you, you know, it is a tool that the author uses. It's very symbolic. But what does everybody else think? Do we have any other comments on that? Sabrina, and then Mariana, and then Marguerite. Sabrina.
Okay, so as a therapist, I look at things always from an emotional perspective. I can't help it. It's just the way I read into things. So I thought it was definitely, there was throughout reading it, there was the over dramatization of, you know, and I thought it was done very well, because it was like the juxtaposition of the times that her parents grew up in and then the modern times. So I thought that was really, like, they brought us back to, and they talked about the history a lot. And then it was really the modern day bullying online, where that was played side by side. And I was like, wow, that was really well done. And when the vision, the way I interpreted that scream, and I think it's deep. I think that there's so many ways it either works for you. You could see it as, you know, this is just my way of how I took it. And I think there's so many different ways. And that's what's beautiful about books, because you can just interpret it, it's left up to the reader. And that, you know, she carried the weight. So I mentioned earlier the energy of the tree. So there's another piece of energy. So when parents, they do have a space between them, it's their relational space that gets passed on to the children. So if they're either raised in secrets, or they're raised in yelling and screaming, or and loving also, you know, whatever it is they're raised in, whatever that space in, the children carry it. So it seems like she took that, like she was holding it, nobody else was doing anything with it, and it just finally, like a explosion, you know, like you shake up a bottle and then it finally explodes after a while. And it's what it seemed like. She was the one to release, to set them free and really set herself free. That's how I looked at it.
I perfectly stated. And let me interject just two quick sentences that really support what you just said, Sabrina. One of them is sometimes family trauma skips a generation altogether and redoubles its hold on the following one.
Yep.
You may encounter grandchildren who silently shoulder the hurts and sufferings of their grandparents. And I love your analogy of the bottle. You know, you hold it in, and then it explodes. And then one more quote that works very well. She writes, if families resemble trees, as they say, arborescent structures with entangled roots and individual branches jutting out at awkward angles, then family traumas are like thick, translucent resin dripping from a cut in the bark. They trickle down generations. The writing is absolutely beautiful, and the symbolism there. And, you know, there's another part somewhere, I can't find it right now, about, you know, too many roots and you know, you get strangled. And that's what happens to Miriam. Okay, I see a lot of hands, which is great. Let's see, we'll get to everybody, I promise.
Yeah, we got Mariana, and then I see Jimbo and Berna. So go
Okay,
ahead.
great. Go ahead, Mariana.
Yeah, could we talk a little bit about Ada's mom? Because I think that whole situation definitely left a lasting effect on her. And she still had a lot of pain from that area. So,
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the questions that I will ask, and I promise we're going to get to you, Jim and Berna, I just want to answer Mariana. It's all about how we see Ada's actions, right? One that she chooses to meet with, I'm sorry, we're talking about Daphne, not Ada. How we see Daphne's actions. We already talked about what her mission is, right? Her mission is to give solace to the families of those who have been lost. She doesn't like what she sees. She doesn't like the situation she's in. And she's actually and literally digging up the past. But by digging up the past, she's creating some anxiety, right? Okay, that's number one. Number two, what happens to her in the end is left, I think, deliberately rather ambiguous. It's okay, so we know that she dies, and we know that there are pills, but we don't know whether or not it was a deliberate act or if it was an accident. And again, that all depends on how you see the character of Mariana, which I would say she's like her daughter, but for different reasons, has a lot of anxiety, and it kind of pushes her into bouts of depression.
Yeah.
And so what did you think, Mariana?
Well, I thought she was helping people in a way that helped her, I think, to some degree, but she still held on to that pain, and she had it.
She has a pain.
And it's nothing she could have gotten rid of. Nothing she did really worked for her. But every step she took, helping people helped her. But I don't think she ever reached that point where it really totally helped her. You know.
Well, you know, she has buried a baby, you know, and she, what do you do with that, right? And so that's something that she still hasn't resolved, this loss, this grief that she's trying to deal with. So I promise we'll get back to her again. Let me take Jim and Berna. Jim?
Hold on.
Okay, you're still muted. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I like the book. I like the perspective of coming from a tree instead of the most direct route of a storytelling. The tree, was talking about the bees, telling about the gay guys who were down at the bottom of the well, handcuffed together, but they protected the girl so that she could try to get an abortion. They were selfless. I mean, they did everything they could possibly do to protect her, and they died. It was
Yeah.
very sad. I am so sad about everybody hating gay people. I really am. And this book brought out some of the issues. No, I mean, there was a lot of stuff in the book. I don't want to
Yes.
try to make it like that's the only one, but they did their darndest to protect her. And she had the baby, and then it was given up for adoption and was buried. And then she and her boyfriend went to go to the gravesite and whatever. And everything at the end kind of worked its way out, which I thought was good. I mean, overall, the book is a great story. And it does talk about all the, I don't know what you call it, the violence, the hatred, and we draw a line down the center of an island, or we do it in Pakistan, India. We create our own hatred. And if you go back to South Pacific, you got to be taught carefully how to hate. So I think this has gone on since 1940 with the musical. It was a good book, and I
Thank
really enjoyed it very much. And I've heard some other people say they understand why the tree told the story. It was a very neutral position to have the tree tell the story. And I really think overall this was a great book. And I will look for other books that are by her because I liked her technique.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to give it whatever you call positive, because there was a different book I voted for the other one. This one turned out to be a good one. I don't know how to phrase it. And that's my only comment. I just wanted to chime in here because I thought everything was good in this book. Little, confusing, the tree telling story, but once you got past that, it was like great book. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And Berna, you're up.
Okay, I'm also a therapist, and I thought the part of the scream was fascinating. To me, my interpretation, the mother was an alcoholic, and alcoholism, by many definitions, I'm just not saying absolutely everybody, many definitions is a disease of denial. And the mother denied her pain and used alcohol as a way to cope with her pain. And her daughter symbolically, in my interpretation, gave the scream that her mother never could. So I thought it was fascinating.
I like that. I like that. Can I steal it? I'm going to steal it.
Absolutely, it's yours. My gift.
Thank you.
And Jim should read The Bastard of Baghdad.
Yes, yes.
Fascinating book.
And the other thing that the author does is, we've talked about this in the past, about piecing together a story with bits and pieces of what you have or what you get, what you inherit. And she writes, I love this passage. There are so many wonderful passages. In real life, unlike in history books, stories come to us not in their entirety, but in bits and pieces, broken segments and partial echoes, a full sentence here, a fragment there, a clue hidden in between. In life, unlike in books, we have to weave our stories out of threads as fine as the gossamer veins that run through a butterfly's wings. And even if you know your parents' story, or your grandparents' story, or your great-grandparents' story, we don't know everything, right? And how my parents met and how they married and how they came from Cyprus to America, I have so many different versions of it. It depends on who was telling the story and who was annoyed at the moment, that was a stupid decision. Oh, that was the best decision we ever made. And, it spans the gamut, right? I don't know everything that happened from the moment they met until the moment one of my parents passed away. as I shouldn't. You know, I am the child. I don't need to know all of their secrets and all of their conversations. And I know even less of my grandparents and even less of my great grandparents. But some of those bits and pieces get passed down, and you kind of make family lore out of it, right? We have our stories. We have the fun story of how my mother and father met. And then we have the story that my mother would tell on the side. It wasn't really like that. And so which one do you believe, right? And so I think that, and what do you do with it? Not only which one do you believe, but what do you do with that story if it's a story that doesn't fit comfortably, right? If it's a story that's not something that you can cope with, right? And I'm thinking of Ada, you know, she is getting these little bits and pieces, trying to put it all together, and just, it doesn't all make sense. But her aunt really helps her bridge that gap a little bit. Yes, Berna, is your hand up from before or up again?
Hold on.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Berna?
I'm done.
Okay.
Okay,
Put it
okay,
down. I
just checking.
forgot.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
All right, just checking. Any other comments or questions? Let's see.
There, yeah.
Okay, yes, okay, yes, Marguerite.
Hold on. If you can unmute.
Okay. I would like to follow up on what Berna said, and on page 325, the writer says, this is what nature did to death. It transformed abrupt endings into 1,000 new beginnings. And I think, like Berna said, when the person could scream and the mother couldn't scream, they're just new beginnings that are happening throughout the whole. Like I said earlier, you have the figs on the fig tree. It's not just the tree, it's producing new life and new beginnings. And I thought that was a very positive way of looking at the story.
It is, but we have to go back to what Jim pointed out, that even the best of people who try so hard and do everything in their power to protect others, unfortunately, don't have the happy ending. You know, it's sad that not everybody gets the happy ending. And what do we even mean by happy ending? If, you know, if we think, oh, if you're a good person, then you'll get the happy ending. Well, it's not working. That equation doesn't work here. It's just not fair, is it? And so what she says, let's see. And again, how do we throw this in there? If you are going to claim, as humans do, to be superior to all life forms, past and present, then you must gain an understanding of the oldest living organisms on Earth, who were here long before you arrived and will still be here after you have gone. Now, I know she's talking about trees, but we can also see this as relevant to a family tree. You know, what is your connection to the previous generation and the generation before that and the generation before that? How much of what has been passed down has stayed with you, and how much of that is going to be in some way, let's say, transplanted, to continue with the metaphor, to the next generation? But in transplanting it, you're giving it different care. Okay, the soil is no longer Cypriot soil, it's English soil. The father is able to take care of that tree, Kostas, in a way that the tree was unable to be protected if it had been left in Cyprus. So again, these really difficult choices and outcomes that sometimes, unfortunately, we have no control over. The only thing we can do is figure out how to, as we said before, we have the information, how we process it and how we deal with it shows, let's say, the wisdom or lack thereof that informs our decisions and our actions. And where is my friend Marianne? I don't want to leave you with not enough of Daphne. So I know that was your question about her. What do you think happens to her in the end? How did you interpret it? Did you see it as a chosen, a deliberate end, or was it an accident?
I chose to think of it as an accident,
Okay.
but I can say that she helped a lot of people. As I said, this was
Yeah.
part of her process, but I still say, and she did in some ways get a happy ending, but that road had a lot of scars, and it left an impression on her that it was negative to her own behavior, of her own good.
Right.
She was drinking a lot.
Yeah.
She was depressed.
Right. Right.
Oh.
And again, it's this trickle down effect, that passage that I read where the sap just keeps trickling down and it
Yeah.
affects, the next generation.
I think it would have helped if she could have resolved her issues with her parents, at least, because they were closest to her that early stage, but that did not.
Well, but I will tell you something, that was never going to happen.
Yeah.
I will tell you, it wasn't happening. No way it was happening. And it was, something that I saw in my lifetime too, when my friends and relatives, my cousins, married outside of what was the expected pool of candidates, right? And that pool was very small. Okay, the pool was, again, if you're thinking of Cyprus, there was no way that a Greek person, male or female, could, should, would marry a Turkish person, and I'm talking heterosexual. We're not even going to same sex, because that was just another component that was going to make everybody crazy. But you definitely did not cross the ethnic line, you did not cross the religious line, and it was something that was just, it was a given. And if you chose to do that, as some people did, I'm not saying that everybody followed the rules, but when you broke those rules, you paid severe consequences, including being excommunicated from your family. And so, yeah, there was no way she could talk to her parents. You can take that to the bank. Not happening.